Hey, welcome back to The Urban Monk. It's Pedram here with an expert on boundaries, Dr. Damon Bayles. He's awesome. He has a very elite clientele in New York City. He's been around the block. And when I met him and started kind of voicing concerns about all the problems that I hear bubbling up from our community, for me, it's always like, hey man, you got terrible boundaries, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your calendar, whether it's saying no. So I said, why don't I bring in an expert to talk about boundaries? And here we are. Enjoy this show, and I'll see you on the other side. Yeah, so boundaries are a big deal. I have a problem. I basically talk about this every single week with my students, and all these problems that people have in life. At a certain point, it's just like, for me, this kind of light bulb goes off and goes, oh, that's just a terrible boundary. And so I'm really, really happy to have you here. This is a hot topic, and I think it's something that just culturally we're atrocious at.
I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they kind of got a bad rap. Is it because we're trying to be people pleasers? Like, is it? I mean, I was never taught about boundaries. I'm from a Persian family. I mean, people slobber all over our boundaries, right?
That's right. It's very enmeshed, or it can be very enmeshed, and that's the status quo. That's the way it is. And so it's really important, especially in this context, in sort of like a Western context. No, there's a point where I end and you begin, and it's really important for me to know where that is for me so that I can be assertive about that and say that. So we're at least in reality together, rather than colluding to not be in reality together and assume we know what each other is thinking and feeling, right? So being explicit really, it reduces anxiety, it reduces ambiguity, and it allows you to really actually be in relation to each other. And that's really crucial. And it can kick up at all sorts of other different things, but at least you're in reality together.
I really like that. Being in reality together versus being in some sort of contrived narrative that each person is trying to bolster, and it just doesn't work. I know you have an exercise that you had mentioned that you like to do to start, and I think that would be awesome, and my audience is down for this kind of stuff. So let's run through that to create the space for this show, because we're going to talk about some heavy stuff.
Yeah, sure. I think that's really great, and this is something I do in my practice often. So just take a second, all of us, to disconnect and notice, put away any distractions that are keeping you away from the here and now. And remember that the purpose of centering is to cross the boundary into this context, right? Into our bodies and into the present moment. So you can close your eyes, you can keep them open, but just allow yourself to slow down. And allow your body to start to breathe for itself. And just take a moment and feel the weight of your body either pressing into the chair underneath you or pressing into the floor underneath you, and just allow yourself to feel grounded for a second and the foundation that you have for your body. And you can take a second and just scan your body and see if there are any places where you're holding tension. And if there are, just try to breathe into those spaces and let go. And notice how different it feels when you let go. And then on your next really deep inhale, make a lot of room for the breath. And as you exhale, bring your energy and your resources back into this context with me and with Pedram, and just notice how different it is to allow yourself the opportunity to arrive. And I know I'm much more here, just having led myself and you all through that. And that's an important crossing to make.
I love that. And so we just created a boundary between the hectic world we walked in from and what we're doing here. And for our listeners and viewers, whatever the heck they were doing before they hit play. And now the space that they're in here. So no, I love that. I love that. And I love that there's this element of mindfulness that is kind of woven in with this understanding of boundaries. And I'd like to kind of dance with that through our conversation today. Because you and I met in New York at an event we were both speaking at, and I just really loved where you were coming from. And I think that the mindfulness piece is really neutered, if you will, without having boundaries. And I've been teaching mindfulness for a very long time, and you are an expert on boundaries and are trained clinically to do this. And I think that this has really been a missing ingredient for the spiritual community, mind-body community, and all these people who just don't want to talk about this stuff.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, I think, and you obviously intimately know this, Western science and Western psychotherapy science is catching up with what Eastern philosophy has known for centuries at this point. And now we just have tools and evidence-based studies to back it up, but this is not new. And I think one of the real key ingredients to mindfulness, especially in a context like psychotherapy or in a context like the one we're talking about, is that it really promotes curiosity, right? It really promotes the capacity to tap into yourself as the instrument rather than all of the things that are vying for your attention outside of you. Your phone, your tablet, anything that can provide all sorts of information. It's like, no, slow down. Take account of yourself. You have all the information you need. Can you be curious about what's coming up for you? And that's a really big shift, I think. And I find that I get so much mileage out of that in helping people be curious about, no, you have a lot of information. And listen to it. What's it telling you? Can you be curious about it?
That requires one to stop, which is a challenge. That's that's the $1 million challenge. That's what I've been working on in my career, is getting people to stop time and just look, right? But and I want to dance around this, like I said, yeah.
But don't you find, I find that to be both personally, but also when I'm in my role as a psychologist, I find that my patients are really relieved once they finally get to stop, right?
Well, it's like panting and dying for oxygen, and then instead of slowing down, you just keep running because you think you need to, and that's right. Everyone who comes in.
Right. It's like, oh no, I just bulldozed over all sorts of really important information that I really need to heed and really need to take account of, because it's going to really inform the decisions that I make. And boy, is it a relief to slow down and actually experience them rather than just bulldozing right over them and not even knowing that they were there in the first place. And as you say, panting and not realizing that you're gasping for air.
How much of that, I wonder, is the aversion to pain versus the instinct to heal, right? It's like a lot of people kind of are running because they don't want to feel the pain of their past or their trauma and all these types of things, and and they'll run till they fall over and die, right?
Right. I think it's habitual. Right. I think it's, this is how I've coped with this for a really long time. Number one, I don't actually really realize that it's a way of coping, right? Because it feels like I'm breathing, right? This is so familiar. And I don't realize that it's a little bit maladaptive, or it's not getting me the needs, or not getting my needs met the way that I actually could optimally get my needs met. It's getting them met just enough to be somewhat satisfying, but not totally satisfying. And I don't even realize that there's another option. That's the piece which I think, perhaps it is aversion to pain, or perhaps it is someone telling themselves, oh, if I slow down, this will be painful. I'll have to deal with all of these things that are really scary, which is anxiety. So I think it's habitual rather than I don't know how conscious it is the gist of what I'm getting at. I think it's habitual.
Got it.
Right.
So let's define what boundaries are, which is kind of funny because it just drawing a line around anything is creating a boundary. So let's draw a line around the word boundaries, and so we know what we're talking about today.
Right. I think it's really useful to operationalize that. When I think of boundaries, I think of limits. Boundaries are quick and dirty. Boundaries are limits. They are. They exist in space and time. We're meeting and we're doing this podcast, which is going to be 45 minutes. It had a start point and an end point. There was a boundary at the beginning. There was a boundary at the end. Boundaries also exist between people. They exist in relationships, in all types of relationships. They exist in our relationships with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, with our employers. But boundaries also exist inside of us. There are limits that we can set inside of us. I'm not willing to go past this point. This is where I am only comfortable going to. And it's really important to have clarity and clarification about that so that you can be assertive in setting the boundary where it needs to be in order to remain your integrity. That can be physical, that can be psychological, that can be emotional, that can be interpersonal.
A lot of my students, the challenges I perceive they're happening, that are happening, and look, here I have a genius psychologist on show, so help me, help them kind of thing, is a lot of them have botched boundaries, and so they have kind of lost that line years ago. And so the actual act of like stepping into a role and drawing a line feels like a declaration of war. And,
Yes.
There's a lot of trepidation around that.
Yes, absolutely. So if we slow down the question, what kind of boundaries can you set with people, right? The way that I like to think about it is that you can set three different types of boundary. You can set either an aggressive boundary, you can set an assertive boundary, or you can set a submissive boundary. Now, if we pull that and tease that apart for a second, let's look at aggressive and submissive, right? Because when we're talking about aggression and submission, we might as well be talking about sadism and masochism, right? We're talking about power. We're not talking about equality. We're not talking about connection. We're talking about if it's aggressive, I'm standing up here, I'm looking down at you, I'm judging you, and I'm telling you that you're terrible and that I'm disappointed in you and that you're bad, right? And it's an evaluative, judgmental statement. Why do you think that it's okay to talk to me like that? There's something really wrong with you and you must be defective, right? You can hear how finger waggy that is. You can hear how judgmental that is. Versus submissive, which would be the opposite end of the spectrum, which would just be complying, right? Which would just be, oh, I don't have to say anything to that really invasive and inappropriate comment because I don't want to rock the boat, right? So you have aggression and submission, which I just want to point out is mammalian, right? Like go watch any animal species out there. You know who's on top, you know who's on the bottom, right? And so you're pulling for power. Right? When you're talking about setting an assertive boundary, it might be something like, don't talk to me that way. That's making me really uncomfortable, which may generate a reaction for sure from the person that you're interacting with, but at least you're in reality together and have to contend with managing that on equal footing, right? And that's a lot of information. So there can be the question of how comfortable are you trying to set boundaries that way, and how do you build your chops up, and how do you sort of flex that muscle so that it becomes more and more habitual and more comfortable. But it's really different from automatically pulling for a power dynamic where you lose your authority, where you lose your capacity to really stand up for yourself and to set your own limits and to set your boundaries.
And there's an incredible amount of psychological energy that goes into kind of gearing up for a full-scale war like that. And I know a lot of people who feel like they need to draw a boundary basically spend, months on end, kind of deploying their troops and getting ready for this battle and not really understanding that that's aggressive, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a few roles. I mean, there's the obvious ones, right? There's like, father, son, mother, daughter, kind of like the familial roles there. Marital is a big one, right? Where, people feel like, their spouse has been this way for 30 years and, it's basically I have to leave them or put up with this crap, right? That kind of thing. And then you'd mentioned corporate, like, kind of employment and all that. But also, and I'm feeling this right now. We got a 2-year-old and, when they say terrible twos, they weren't kidding. And so, so my wife and I have a different notion of boundaries.
Absolutely.
And so the kid sees that and it's become a thing. Now it's like, hey, I might as well just use you for my counseling right here. It's like it's become this thing where it's just like, holy crap, my line and her line are different and the kid is exploiting the delta.
That's exactly right. And so, so take the system into account, right? And when I say system, I mean all of the parts that create the whole, right? So if you think systemically about that, you and your wife have to be on the same page in order to set boundaries with your child, which can be really difficult because you and she each, or any couple, each has whatever they're bringing to that conversation and all of the history that goes with it, right? And so I think that the example of parent-child is a really great starting point to talk about boundaries, because I think it is applicable across all of the different contexts that we're in and all of the roles that we play in the different contexts, right? I like to use the example, and I don't mean to infantilize any other type of role, like employment. I use this example with psychologists. So think about a child who wants an ice cream cone. Like, if you can say, here, yes, you can have one ice cream cone. What's the child going to do after they finish their ice cream cone? They're going to say, I want another, right? And if you've said, no, you get one, that's a boundary and that's a limit. And there's something about that which is containing to a child. That doesn't mean that the child isn't going to hate it. It doesn't mean that the child isn't going to have a reaction to not being able to get another one. But the real important piece here is that you hold the boundary that you set, so that a limit is actually a limit. And it will give the child plenty of room to flop around that limit and have all sorts of reactions. But this is the piece that's really important. It's terrifying if you keep moving the goalposts. There's something about boundaries that are really containing. They reduce anxiety, they reduce ambiguity, and if you just keep moving the goalpost, you're going to instill this idea, oh, well, you can have whatever you want, and there's a boundaryless space that invariably comes out of that, which is not useful for anyone.
Yeah. I see this in our culture now. You could tell a kid who grew up with poor boundaries because they feel like all they need to do, they're one good tantrum away from getting what they want.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the question that I always come back to is, do you want to cope with this as an adult the way that you coped with this as a child, by throwing a tantrum, which is destroying all sorts of relationships in your life and really wreaking havoc on a lot of things? Or do you want to learn how to get your needs met and soothe yourself in a different way? That's an important conversation to have, right? Yeah. And I'm going to hold my boundaries around you clinically in order to make sure that that exploration happens, right? Yeah. I'm not going to keep moving the goalpost. So let's really explore this really old patterned way of dealing with the world, because it's not getting you what you want anymore.
It almost seems to me like there's a parasitic bedfellow with poor boundaries in the form of codependency, and how people have kind of co-conspired to kind of slobber across each other's boundaries in a way. And I see it everywhere, right? Whether it's a traditional culture or a marriage or, all of it. Like mommy needs the kid to define her type of thing. Yep. It seems like that's something you have to unpack with your clients as you start going through these boundaries and letting them see that. Is that
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, so this is where if I take a step back and just say again, the way that I work with individuals, but certainly the way that I work with couples, is to think think systemically, right? And a really wonderful idea in that, when you're talking about codependency or you're talking about a dynamic that has emerged over the course of a marriage or a relationship, is it is in the system, and this is how you two have colluded to get your needs met. Let's unpack it. You each are getting something out of this that is very old, but is also very present. And it's not necessarily how you want to go about doing it in a way that allows you to be on the same page and approach each other as equals. You know how to manage this where it becomes a power differential. Let's figure out how to step out of those different ways of, here we go again, setting boundaries, so that it's not aggressive and submissive, or it's not sadistic and masochistic, but it's let's get you on par so that you can actually have this conversation and take each other in. Let's interrupt that old patterned way of dealing with the world and try something different so that you guys can meet on an equal playing field. And that's a really useful idea. It's in the system. One person isn't solely responsible for all of the problems of the marriage, the relationship, the friendship. It's in the system. You're colluding to do it together. How can we be curious about that to come up with a way of getting out of that?
I think that's where a lot of people perceive their fear about going in. It's like the Tarot Arcanum of the tower comes to mind, where it's like we built this false tower and a lightning bolt just kind of breaks it up. And as we start to create charge and this kind of dissonance, it feels like bringing it together is going to be like this bolt of lightning that's going to just destroy your entire life. But you do this every day of your life with with dozens of clients every week type of thing. So help our viewers and listeners understand how nice it is to kind of meet in that kind of systems conversation to then work a solution.
Well, it's first of all, it's visible on when I watch my clients shift from, I'm not going to budge, to opening up. I mean, talk about a boundary permeability. They go from, no, this boundary is closed. I've got the troops in the background, and I am a stone's throw away from activating them and firing all I've got at you, right? Which is a really aggressive, impermeable stance to, when you change the way you said that and told me how you felt about it, and that it makes you really sad that you're experiencing fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're experiencing, I hear that really differently. And I don't need to send the arsenal over there to destroy you. I actually need to see if I can open up and see how I resonate with that and what information that I have about how I'm contributing to this dynamic, because we're both creating it right now at the same time. Not, it's all your problem, right? So you can you can visually see people change. And I think it's also really important to realize that these, the way the expression that you used earlier, sort of like having the troops in the background, is distressing, right? Misattunement is distressing, right? There's this really great is the wrong way of describing it. There's this really significant study called the still face experiment, which has been going on at Harvard, I believe, for decades at this point. And what they do is they instruct a caregiver and a child to face each other. And then and to interact, and then they instruct the caregiver to turn away and to return with no expression on the face, and then they watch what happens. And what happens takes a very short amount of time, but this 4-month-old does all of the things to engage the caregiver that they can, that work, right? In other contexts. They coo, they laugh, they do really cute things, and then they start to get agitated because those things aren't working and they don't have language, right? And agitation turns into aggression, turns into despair, and turns into a meltdown within 3 minutes. And then the mother or the father and the caregiver is instructed to turn back and to soothe the child. But in those 3 minutes, you see just what happens when there's misattunement. And it can be terrifying. It can be really it can be an overwhelming experience. And look, that's what it's like for a 4-month-old. But I think that's really instructive. I mean, I think we all have the experience of what it's like to try to be getting our needs met, and to not be able to soothe ourselves internally, right? And to use all of our defenses and resources to go and get it, right? Rather than in a couple or in an individual, to really know, how do I manage this differently? How do I slow down? How do I soothe myself? How do I take in all of the information that I have so that I can get it across the boundary into whatever context I'm working in, whether it's with a couple, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, an employer, so that I don't just completely melt down and give up my resources.
So this is something that perplexes me. So most of the people that kind of come to me with questions about this, usually the people in the down dog position, right? They're the ones that have been occupied, and the occupying force has a strong disincentive to let go of kind of ground gained, if you will. It's like, hey, I come home, I throw my slippers in the corner, and I take off my clothes and walk towards the couch and say, get me a beer. And she's been doing that for 30 years. And what do you mean now all of a sudden things are different? It's like, he had it kind of good, right? And so how do we kind of broach that and kind of meet in the middle when the person who has kind of slobbered over the boundary and is kind of benefiting, they feel like they would be losing way more?
Right. I mean, I think there are a couple of really important things in what you're saying. One is that it takes 30 years for a system to get calcified the way that it gets calcified,
Yeah.
right? And each member of a couple or each member of a system, where all of the members of a system are playing a role in that, right? So that's one piece. A second piece is when one member of a system changes, there's going to be turbulence, right? And turbulence isn't necessarily good or bad. It's just information, right? And so that's an important sort of forecasting piece. Look, I can't tell the future, right? The future is the realm of anxiety, which I try my damnedest to stay out of, and I try to help people stay out of as well. But there is going to be inevitably turbulence in a system when you change one of the actors, or when one of the actors changes, right? So I think that that's just a piece of forecast to remember. And then, look, there are lots of options then. One is nobody can tell you that you're not experiencing something, right? So you can find ways of testing the waters of saying, hey, you're doing this and it's making me furious with you because you've been throwing beer bottles at me for 30 years and telling me to get you your food, but I'm really uncomfortable. Right? Like, that's a really different statement than you're doing something wrong. And it's take up the authority that you have in your role to say, no, this is the information I have, and this is the information that I'm going to put in the space between us. I'm curious about it. Can you be curious about it with me? Now, look, if somebody, and I realize we're condensing down a lot into sort of digestible, manageable ideas here. But if you do that enough, or if one does that enough, and there's no movement on the other end, that's a lot of information about the reality that you are trying to be in with somebody, right? And that goes back to what we said at the beginning. If you are attempting to be in reality together, and one person doesn't want to be in reality, okay, so that's an important piece of information. And look, it flies in the face of a lot of, oh, we're together forever, and this marital thing, we have to work on it, and it's bliss. Look, people get divorced, right? The question is, are you going to be in reality together and make an informed decision together or not? Right? And that can be to move closer, that can be to move further away, that can be to manage the dynamics that invariably come up in every couple, right? Or in every system. The question is, how are you going to recruit your resources to do that work? Right? Because I think one of the things that comes through loud and clear from talking with you is that your viewers and your followers, they want to do that work. They're sick and tired of being disconnected from themselves and from the systems that they're in, or from the relationships that they're in, right? So if they can be curious, that's such a key ingredient, right?
There's a big piece to this, and this is a can of worms, but I'm going to open it slightly. I'm just going to kind of peel open the top real quick. And you touched on it, and I just want to kind of unpack a little bit, is a lot of the people that I talk to are really hung up on this till death do us part thing, and are trying to preserve the sanctity of marriage and don't want to be one of those statistics. Therefore, will definitely not be aggressive, let alone assertive, to try to correct something. And so instead of having reality be kind of the common ground of having this relationship that's built on love and partnership, they'll allow this thing to kind of move that's no longer what it was intended to be. And so the sanctity of what they're trying to preserve is not reality, and to me that's not right. And so there's a lot of, and there's a lot of charge around this topic, obviously.
Absolutely.
But it's an important one to tease out for a quick second, because if it's not working, the whole point, this whole point of, the gospel and all that is for you to find love and communion and work together on stuff and not bolster a faux reality.
Right. I mean, I think that word reality keeps coming up. I mean, I think you're right. It is a can of worms. And I think I go back to, can we be in reality together? Because if we can be in reality together and attune, we can figure this out. And that on some level is the goal that I have. Not to break couples up, not to keep couples together, but no, how do you take up your membership in your role, in your system? Not how do you stay entrenched in your old way of being in relation to yourself, and promoting your spouse or your business partner or your boss or what have you, being in that same way of coping, right? The goal is, how do we get into reality together, and how do we know what our responsibility is in this reality and the role that we have, so that we can actually negotiate and manage this, right?
Yeah.
Not what is it assumed this is supposed to be? What is it assumed that this is supposed to look like? How do I conform to your idea of what this is supposed to look like? Right? Then it's not taking the system, the relationship into account. It's taking the individual in relation to him or herself into account, and that can be a tricky spot, right?
Yeah, and I think that really dovetails into this conversation about mindfulness and how mindfulness, what we're talking about is awareness. We're talking about presence. Like if you're in reality, you're present. And a lot of us, it's really easy to get pulled out of the present moment and just turn on the TV, watch the Kardashians, eat processed food. There's everything out there is competing for your attention to pull you out of your center.
That's right.
And we started this exercise getting centered. Right?
That's
so
right.
How does mindfulness work with boundaries, and how are they coupled?
Well, I think that this goes back to this idea of, okay, so if we can be in the present moment, and if I can be in the present moment, and if I can monitor my attention and where it's going, right? That can be Herculean, right? I mean, that can be a Herculean task. And I think that mindfulness is one way of really staying as centered as possible, decreasing the chatter, and this is really crucial, being curious when attention starts to waver, and not saying, oh, I'm wrong, I'm bad for doing that, but, oh, look at that. That thought just totally derailed me. How do I come back to my breath? Right? And I think that the more we can be present, the more we can be mindful, the more information that we have internally to help us know, A, where we are, B, how we engage and interact from that place. So that invariably is going to inform the boundaries that we set with ourselves, because we will be in reality with ourselves and with the people that we are in relation to. So I think that they're really, it's two sides of the same coin, right? Let's compare and contrast that with the opposite of being distracted and being having our attention be solely dictated by our Facebook feed and by the reality TV show that we're watching, and the state of relationship to ourself that generates, which is not taking into account all of the information that we have. And of course, the boundaries that we set for ourselves and with others are not. Hold on. The boundaries that we set with ourselves in that spot when we're behaving that way are not mindful. They're not taking us into account, right? So I think that this is where it's two sides of the same coin. It's what information do you have? How are you listening to it? Are you curious about it? And how then do you start to operationalize that in your life? Starting with yourself and then with the people in it.
So the elephant in the room, again, seems to be also this thing that smothers all of us called stress. And so it's a lot easier. If I'm running my normal life, I could make good decisions. I could come from my prefrontal cortex. I could actually have agency and be a bit more mindful. But then under duress, we tend to make bad decisions. So mindfulness and stress also will help impact boundaries with decisions. I'm reading into this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, mental illness in a Western context boils down to stress and coping. What is the stress and how do you cope with it? What resources do you have to be able to combat the stress that you're under, right? And what's so crucial and what I love about mindfulness is that, I mean, you know the research incredibly well. I mean, if there's really, there isn't a silver bullet in science, but if there was anything close to it, I mean, the mindfulness literature is so compelling over the course of the past 40 years. I mean, what they are showing is not just that, I mean, with this revolution in sort of thinking about neuroplasticity, like it's actually changing brain structures and the way that the brain functions, right? This is really shocking. And the upsides are tremendous. I mean, increasing concentration, attention, neuroplasticity. You know, I mean, we can, and this is not news to your listeners. The list goes on and on and on. And I think that if we go back to the question of, okay, mindfulness, getting centered, having a relationship with oneself, then of course it's going to directly relate to the boundaries that we set with ourselves. No, I'm not comfortable doing that. I was totally unaware that while I was sunbathing and I was lathered in oil, that my skin was burning, right? It was like, you know, it's like, when was the last time you actually took a mindful breath when you were doing something like sunbathing? It's like, oh no, your skin is frying. And you can totally tune off from that, or you can tune into that and be like, wow, that's an important piece of data. I don't like that. I don't like how that feels. I'm going to make that change my behavior. And look, fill in the blank, whether it's sun tanning or eating processed foods or watching another reality television show, right? I mean, it all comes back to, wait, there are different ways of setting boundaries and limits internally and externally around how we live our lives, how we engage with the life that is there to engage with, rather than the life that we pull over our eyes, which distracts us from all of the information that we have. I feel like I may have gotten a little bit away from your question.
No, it's, you know, it's a continuum, right? It's, you have to be there. If you're not in the room, the decision making isn't happening. Like, you're not, your center needs to be present so that you can make the right decision. And I think a lot of us are just never there, right?
There's one other, I'm sorry, there's one other piece that I think is really crucial here, which is that I think it's so important when we're thinking about coping and old ways of coping and getting into these dynamics with our bosses or our spouses or our children, that these are old ways that we use to cope to keep ourselves alive. That doesn't mean that they work anymore, right? And that doesn't mean that they're efficient, effective, and get us what we want. And it's really important to have compassion for yourself when you use them, because when you're in it, it's hard to even recognize that you're in it, because on some level, the operating system in those places is survival, right? So having a tool like mindfulness, or wait, let me get centered. I'm disconnected from myself. I don't want to engage in this relationship, business venture, partnership, fill in the blank from this place. Let me get back in touch with myself, have a little bit of compassion for the fact that I was just coping with this situation that's really stressful in an old way, and get my feet back on the ground so that I've got my resources, I've got my common sense, and I can actually make informed decisions.
There's a word in all languages, but in the English one, it's a two-letter word. It's spelled no, right? It's N-O. And you know, I find that people are very, very reluctant to use that word. I mean, be it that we're people pleasers, we want, especially on the West Coast, I mean, forget about it. Everyone's way too nice, right? And you know, I have a lot of respect for people who say no. It's like, hey, we're gonna go do this thing. You wanna join us? I'd love to, but I can't. Thank you.
That's right.
Right? And that person has just, you know, not only respectfully said no to me, they then said yes to the commitment that they had already made, and yes to their health, and yes to all these other things. And so how do you say no without pissing people off? How do you say no as a people pleaser and really start to flex that muscle to understand that you have some agency there?
Right. Well, first of all, I think you just did it, and you did it beautifully, right? And I also recognize that implicit in your question is that feels incredibly aggressive to a lot of people.
Yes, yes. I'm good at it, right, yeah.
Right, exactly. You're good at it. There are a lot of people who aren't, right? So one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is starting and trying that out in contexts that feel safe, right? Like I wouldn't encourage you, if you're terrified of your boss, to have the laboratory where you try out how to say no be with your boss,
Right.
right? I would have the laboratory where you try out saying no be with somebody that you really trust, like a spouse or a friend. And you can also do some reality testing about that. Hey, I just said no. I really want you to know that this is something I would love to do, but I've got this other commitment. How do you feel about that? Or I'm telling myself that you're really pissed off at me right now. Is that true? Right? That's not something I would suggest doing with your boss, right? That is not in your boss's job to answer a question like that, right? But if that is how you can learn how to bolster up the resources to be able to get comfortable saying no, it'll be that much easier once you've done enough reality testing with the people where you think the world is going to end and it doesn't.
Right.
Right?
Love
so
that.
it's start in small, manageable chunks, which feel safe.
Find a safe
right?
workshop type of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's like one of the ideas that I love about what I do is put your researcher cap on, right? Like go collect some data. If you're terrified about doing something, right? Go try putting your toe in the water and then reality test how that was for you, what the impact was that had, right? Don't just stay in this. I mean, look, I think anxiety is another crippling epidemic, and that may be a strong word, but it is such a default, right? Which is, I'm going to tell myself that this really scary thing is going to happen in the future, and I'm going to completely divorce myself from the resources that I have in the present moment, which A, tell me that I can't tell the future, and B, move me away from all of the information I have about how I actually want to be in this context, right? So it's like actually cultivating a culture where you can reality test is, and what I mean by reality testing is, hey, I just said that and you had a reaction or I had a reaction. Can we get on the same page about that so that we're in reality together is so essential. Right? Rather than, I just said this thing, I saw you have a reaction and I'm telling myself that you're furious with me. And I'm going to believe that. And I'm going to spend the next 3 weeks believing that and being in relation to you from a place of terror. Right? So I think that A, put on your researcher cap, B, have it be in manageable, safe chunks, and recognize that these are skills and tools that you've got. They're like muscles that you have to cultivate. You have to learn how to flex them. They don't just happen overnight. Another way of thinking about this is that thought that your spouse, brother, best friend, boyfriend, girlfriend, mother is furious with you because you just did something. That's a really old way of thinking it. You've probably been thinking it in one way or another for your entire life. It is not necessarily reality, but boy, does it feel like reality when you think it and tell yourself it, because it's so automatic and it engenders all sorts of feelings. Okay, so take a deep breath. Get centered and try to be mindful of what you know about that so that you can try something else, right? It's not the only option, right? We have multiple options. And that's one of the really crucial things that I try to do in my work is, okay, so you're telling yourself that's the only option you have. What's another one? Let's think about this for a second, right?
And most people never do. Most people have no idea that there might be another option other than their go-to.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Dr. Damon Bayles, this is such a provocative and interesting topic. I would love to have you back on the show. I know people are going to gobble this up, and just tell my audience where they can find you and your work.
So I'm based in New York City. I've got a private practice in the Village, in Greenwich Village. And I've got a website, which is damonbayles.com. That's DAMONBAYLES.com. And there's all that you can go on my website, and there are resources on there. You can also email me, and my phone number is on the website. So that's really the best place to get me.
Love it, love it. I love that you're taking a stand for this and really doing this work. It's a lot of work. It's hard work, but you're helping a lot of people with it.
Thank you. And Pedram, I want to thank you. I think that it's so refreshing and exciting and invigorating to be able to talk about this stuff in a way that doesn't compromise the science and the integrity of these are really complicated and complex ideas, right? That doesn't mean that we can't talk about them. And it doesn't mean that we can just slap a label on it of 6 ways to detox and never have anxiety again. No, this is a part of being human. And it's such a relief and it's so invigorating to be able to be in a space like this where we get to talk about these ideas and really dive into them and recognize, no, we're not going to take the easy way out here, but let's really chew on these, because you know what? If we're chewing on them, everyone is chewing on them. And let's actually have a conversation about what is, rather than about how to get an app which is going to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the context under which we met. We were on a panel for Equinox talking about how media and obviously this is to the audience, how media is basically making everything too soundbitey, and everyone's just looking for the latest and greatest kind of thing, whiz-bang thing that's going to fix all your problems, and that's just bullshit, right? And so we're here to have real conversations, and the literal translation of Kung Fu, I always tell my audience, is hard work. But once you realize that life is hard work and you work to unpack these things, you get good at your Kung Fu, you get good at life, and then your problems they're not that heavy. I mean, you get better at it.
Right. There's a satisfaction and a pleasure in building these muscles because they really do start to have major impacts. That's the thing, right? And they're impacts that you own, that you did the work to, and ownership, as soon as I said that, even sounds like a weird word, but it's you did the work, and it's okay to be satisfied about that and to notice the impact that it has on your life and on the relationships that you have.
Absolutely, and it doesn't take that long. It's you start doing the work, you start reaping the rewards, and I was literally just planting carrot seeds in my garden yesterday with my kid, and those won't be carrots for a long time, but we've already gone through a couple rounds and we've had carrots. So once you see it go through the first harvest, then you're like, oh, I like gardening, right? Like the work becomes real fun. Hey, so thank you for being here. I love the work that you do, and we'll have you back on the show for sure.
I would love it. I so appreciate it. It's really been fun talking to you.
Cheers. So there you have it. You got to draw some lines, and you have to understand the roles. Boundaries are huge. I think I'm going to keep on this subject because I see it so pervasive. I see it bothering so many people, not just in our community, but my patients over the years. It's a big deal. So take it to heart. Go home and practice some of this. It's important to understand your role in a relationship, because a boundary has a line and you're on one side and the other person's on another. So look at your side of that as well. Dr. Bayles is awesome. Check out his site. Check out where his words resonate in your mind and in your life, really. Next week, my buddy Jim Quick is coming into the studio. He is super genius brain trainer extraordinaire, remembers numbers by the thousands of digits and memorizes names and all sorts of things that most of us think that we're terrible at. He's got a very interesting story. He wasn't born that way, so he's going to tell us how he learned to become a learner. It's very powerful, and I've taken the challenge, and I'm now doing his speed reading and a super memory course, because why not? I'll see you next week. Enjoy your week.